Well, welcome back everyone. Welcome to part 2, which is not the second part, but it is part 2 of dial recreation video series that I started in GIMP a while back, showing you how you can get a decent scan of a dial that you want to recreate, assuming you have the parts to do it. I then went on to show you how you can use maybe an image if you don't have the ability to scan the original dial, but you do have a picture of what it looked like. Ways to get something to start as a base image that you can then start to rebuild your dial on. And what I want to go into here is how we can actually recreate the artwork for that dial. So the thing we want to do here is bring in our image that we scanned, and I'm using import. So I'm going to import this, and that's going to bring up a dialog tool of which the defaults will be fine. We're not super critically worried about this particular image in here. It's just going to be a guide. Grab the select tool, which is this one up here, and move this into the workspace. This is not part of your image. This is a guide that shows an A4 page sized workspace area. We can work anywhere we like, right? It doesn't matter. We can work over here and it will have absolutely no effect on what we're doing. By habit, I kind of work in here because it reminds me of the overall size of things. Stuff can be scaled really easily later on, and you can see these handles here that do exactly what you expect they might do. So I'm just going to undo that, Control Z, put it back the way it was, and we're going to use a feature of graphics programs called layers. If you're as old as I am, then you'll remember teachers at school using overhead transparencies, and the really cool teachers made multiple layer transparencies where they would have things that would flip in and out as they were going through the notes. Think of layers as just like that. We're basically dealing with different parts of the images on its own transparency layer, and we can move things in and out. So if we go to the layer menu and grab layers and turn that on, it's going to pop up over here, and you can see there's one layer which we can turn on and off. We can also lock it, which will stop us being able to move things, and we'll do that in a moment, just so that we don't end up inadvertently moving this or resizing it while we're working, because we want the dial that we create to be of the same proportions as the one we scanned in almost all cases for this kind of work anyway. So let's create a new layer, and we're going to call it background image, and we're going to put it below the current one. We basically want it at the bottom of the stack so that everything else we do is on top. This is currently on layer 1. If we right click on it, then there's an option down here called move to layer, and we can move it to the background image and then lock it. So that's now in the background. We can turn it on and off, and we can work above it, and whatever we do on this layer, and I'm just going to doodle a little bit here, using my awesome art skills. There you go. I've recreated the Columbus logo on the dial. No, I haven't. There you go. Now it's done. That is on a completely separate layer, which I can turn on and off, or if I want to see how it looks without my guide, there it is. And I mean, that's clearly beautiful. The one thing I've got wrong with this is that the thickness of the lines is not quite where I need it to be. So let's grab the select tool, grab that C, and what we want is the fill and stroke menu. Fill and stroke is how we deal with the outline of an object and its internal color. So fill, we can fill something, and stroke, we can add a stroke to it, right? We definitely don't want our C filled, but the stroke we might want to change the color of, and the stroke style gives us the ability to change the thickness. So there, that's clearly much better, and you can go through and do that for all of the items. This, however, is not a raster image like the image behind, and you can see sort of the pixelation in the background image. It's blurred slightly because it's a vector image program, and vector images are made from instructions. They're not made from pixels, and so no matter how much we zoom in here, you won't see pixels, which makes this ideal for this kind of work, because you can set things up and then scale it to suit and not end up with blurry edges or pixelated images because you made something smaller and then bigger again, or this is kind of ideal in that regard. The thing you can do, if you're interested, is go and have a look in the XML editor, and it will show you the thing that you've got currently selected, which is here, and these are the instructions that make up this particular item. So here you've got each of the waypoints. So if we look at our node editor here, or our node selection tool, there's a series of different nodes, and each one of these nodes tells you where the node is located, and it also has some handles that determine how the line interacts with the nodes either side of it. So we can actually modify this, and it does modify our instruction set for this particular node. But I could do something like, here's a stroke width of 0.66, so I could change that to 1.66, and you can see that it affected the stroke width. Right, it's not something, like I said, that you probably really want to do, because you can make all these modifications in a much more friendly interface. So this C is clearly not useful to us. If we click on that node and I hit delete on the keyboard, I can get rid of it. I click on this node, hit delete on the keyboard, I can get rid of it. In fact, I can probably get rid of this one, and this one, and probably this one. And then I could move that node to there, that node to there, and so against the odds a little bit, and 2's probably not quite enough, because to get that curve I probably don't have quite the sweep on the C here, so I'm going to add, by double clicking, add one more node in, and there you go. And you can spend quite a bit of time getting that looking really good. I could probably sit here for another 10 minutes just tweaking this to get it really perfect, but the one thing you want to keep in the back of your mind while you're doing this is that it's probably that big to someone standing in front of the radio. Even at that big, fine-tuning and really getting into the absolute nitty-gritty of tweaking this is not likely to make a difference to the average person looking at the radio, or even a critical person looking at it, because the dial itself on this particular set is quite small. So don't get too hung up on the details. Get it about right and then leave it alone, because you will go down a rabbit hole and spend hours trying to get things exactly right, and there probably isn't much need to do so. So you can see I've taken what was a terrible scribble and actually turned it into a fairly decent representation of the C, and I can just go along and do this with all of these. I'm going to get rid of that node there, and that one, and whoop, hang on, what's going on there? Okay, so what's happened here is that this is not actually an O. So because I never created the full path, what I've ended up with is a U. Now I could just drag this over here and then try and get it to look roughly right, but you can see it's not actually joining and connecting the nodes like that. It won't actually properly join, and therefore it won't actually be a proper O, which may or may not matter once you get a little bit deeper into things. So what I'm going to do instead is select this node and then hold down the shift key and select this node. When you hold down the shift key in most programs, it'll allow you to select multiple things at once. So I've now selected these two nodes together, and we've got this tool up here called Join Selected End Nodes, and by doing that, it's basically going to add a segment in between, which, whilst it looks a bit janky at the moment, is actually what we want. So now I've done that, I can get rid of a few of these nodes, and there's quicker ways to do this, but I'm just doing it manually to kind of show you what's going on. And I want to get down to just 2, because we can make a circle with just 2. The handle for that node has disappeared way off up here. You'll notice that these handles are independent of each other, and that means we can end up with a weird sharp look to things. What we can do is make these nodes smooth, and now each of the nodes handles moves in relation to the other one. The length is not the same, and if we also choose make the node symmetric, now the handles will be the same, and if I modify one handle I modify the other. And because we're making a circle and an O, that's kind of what we want. So I'll bring this one up here and I'll do the same. So I want to make it smooth and I want to make it symmetric. And then really quickly you can see that I've got an O there that I can deal with. All I need to do is get the size about right, and 0.465. So you want to keep these about the same if you can. Don't know what this one was. That's 0.565. Let's just see what making it 0.5 does. So 0.5 is probably about right. You can see a bloom of the background coming through, but we can live with that. One of the things that you can do that can be quite handy is, see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 nodes in this L. I don't want those two, so I'm just going to drag a box around them and then hit the delete key, and now we're down to our 3 nodes. So I can then move the nodes where I want them. I grab the handle instead. Something to be aware of. You see that color change when you're on the node itself. Alright, so there's our L. Now if I hold down the control key when I'm moving handles around, it's going to snap it to certain angles, and that's up and down, which we want. If I move this, now get it about there. This one again, snap it, and you can see these two handles aren't lining up. The reason is because these two nodes aren't lining up, and this is where your guides are going to be really useful. So if you want things to line up, bring in a guide. It will snap to certain things, so let's just snap it there because we've located that in the right place, and then we can get this node to snap to it. And then because we've also got a line here, let's drag a guide down from the top, snap it onto there, and get this to snap. And then we also want this. Now we don't need to actually use the control key to get it to snap now, because it'll just snap to that guide. which means we have a nice neat L. And because we worked out that we want 0.5 as a width, now we've got our L. And so we can just keep working our way along here, and using those nodes and the node tools, we can basically finish this off and create a reasonable proxy of our Columbus logo. We're going to do exactly the same thing over here with the ship, but let's just do it a little bit neater, because there's no point making life too difficult for ourselves. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with this wave at the bottom, which will give us a starting point, and I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to move off it slightly and then hover back over, and you see this teal color, which means that you're now connecting to that original line that you just made, and that this new node that you make will actually be part of the previous one. And that's important, because if we do this, and I'm just going to finish it off and then show you, and don't panic, no, this is not a wave at all, but go to my node selection tool, grab between these two nodes and pull down. Right. And there we go. Now again, I know it may not be exact, but you're dealing with something that's probably about that big in reality. It's not going to matter too much. If I don't, you can see it snapped to that, but I didn't have the blue line. See how we don't have a join there? So it's not actually part of the line, and that can be a problem for all kinds of reasons. So it's something to be aware of, that if you're making a continuous line, or you're trying to do what we did before, or you want an O, you need to actually join them up properly. So you've got those tools. Remember, you've got the join selected end nodes so that you can join things together. Let's just go through, and if you've got a nice continual curve like this, there's a slight bend in it here, so I'm going to put right, so this is the process that I'm going to go through in order to create the outline of this ship image. I'm not going to do this twice. There is another one over here, and this is the one that's been damaged slightly, so basically all I'll do is go through and create this one and then copy it over to here. You can select everything and change globally the size of your lines. I'm going to leave this 0.265. It's just worked out reasonably well there, so I'm just going to leave that alone. But for certain things you may want a thicker or a thinner line. I think most of the lines on here, all being the same, will be perfectly fine. So for now I'm just going to go through, and I'm actually going to get rid of these. One of the things that may be useful, and in this case they will be, I'm going to create a guide for the top, and I'm going to create a guide for this line underneath, and then actually for the U, let's just do that. Plonk that on the line, change it to 0.5. We are going to want a node there. I'm going to want that to be symmetric and smooth. I think it's already smooth, but why is that not symmetric? Alright, so there's our U. I think the one thing I'm not totally happy with there is the bottom of the L and the U not being down low enough. So you can either leave it or you can start messing with it. I'm probably just going to start messing with it and bring this down a little bit. You need to hover over your guide until you get that hand. Click and just drag it down a little bit. Then go back to your node selection tool. Bring that down. Bring that down. Bring that down. That's a little bit better. I'm a wee bit happier with that. Do the M. Now, at this point, what's going to be really useful is to have a guide. Which is basically lined up with the bottom here. Go back to the freehand drawing tool. Again, use the control to get it to snap to straight up and down. Make sure it changes to that teal color. Going to want to be about here somewhere. And control to get it to be nice and straight again. Change it to 0.5. Now, we do have a little bit of an issue here. That's not normal. We can certainly fix that a little bit later on. I'll come back to it. We can tweak it, or like I said, you're just not going to see it. It's actually on this particular dial completely irrelevant, except from a perfection point of view. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with a bit of perfection. I waste an awful lot of time making these things look as good as possible, but you know, diminishing returns. You can spend a lot of time doing a lot of not very much. So let's get this. Now notice how that's snapping. I'm trying to get that up a little bit further, but when I get it close to where I want to be, it's snapping to the other one. The simplest thing to do here, I could turn off snap, but the simplest thing is just to zoom in a little bit more and then grab the right tool. And I really want that about there. Then I want, so don't be afraid to use guides. Use as many guides as you want. Guides are handy. So I'm just putting them where I know I'm going to be drawing. And then, because I want this to be closed, just to ensure that it closes properly, I'm going to click on that one, shift click on that one, and join them. Now it looks more like the bee you'd find on Greek souvlaki shop than a Columbus radio, but again, node tool, just tidy things up. Right, first and most usefully thing, make them smooth and symmetric, because they're the end of a curve, and that's going to be the most useful thing to have. We want to get these straight, so again use the control button as you're moving this just to get it to snap so that it's nice and vertical. You can just eyeball it, of course. This you'll want coming straight out. These also you'll want coming straight out. The bottom one, maybe the handle a little bit further out, because the bottom bow of the bee is bigger. Again, we're getting the snapping action, which can be annoying. Just zoom in so that you've got more space to deal with stuff. And then 0.5. Again, it's not super perfect, but it's not super critical. We've already had a U, so I'm going to select that with the selection tool, not the node selection tool, but the overall selection tool. Grab that U, and I'm going to go Control D, which is duplicate. It is very similar to Control C and then Control V for copy and then paste, but Control D, duplicate it. You can't really tell, but if I use the right arrow on the keyboard now, I can move my duplicated U along, and that's a default amount. We can't get it quite right. I could grab it with the mouse, but then I'll probably move its position up and down. If I hold down the shift and use the arrows, I should be able to move it in much bigger steps. It's really handy when you're moving things long distance. If I hold down the Alt button and then use the left or right arrows, it'll move it almost pixel by pixel. Now, it's not identical to the other U, and again, I could get really fussy with it, but I'm not going to, for a couple of reasons. As stated, it's tiny, you're never going to see it. It doesn't look quite right with the background, but remember that in the layers menu, turn that off. Right, we're not going to see it. That's not going to be part of the finished image. So it's just not critical. Right, there's a start of our boat and water over there and our logo. So one thing I'm not particularly happy with is this bee. Alright, so you can mess around to your heart's content getting things right. Most of the time it's not that important. Right, node tool. Put another one in there. Now, interesting point, something that just happened to me there. If I'm on a node tool and I hold down the control button to zoom in, see how as I'm rolling the mouse wheel, I'm going roll, 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 and what it does is it actually incrementally starts selecting nodes away from it, and it'll do that if I grab the middle one and I roll. It'll start doing it out from that center point out in either direction. So you can actually select groups of nodes. So if you draw, this can be kind of handy. If you draw something freehand like that and then you look at all the nodes and you want to get rid of all of these nodes kind of quickly, grab that one, be hovered over it, and then see how it's starting to spread, then hit the delete key and I've got rid of all of those nodes. There are situations where you're going to have a big mess with tons of nodes that you don't want. One of the other things you can do is simplify, and when you simplify, it will reduce the number of nodes but try and maintain the overall shape of the image. So if we just get rid of this and I make a really complex, so this will have lots and lots of nodes. And if I go path and then simplify, right, it's maintaining the shape but it's reduced the number of nodes, which does a couple of things. One, it makes the image faster to manage because you're not dealing with quite so many data points and the computer doesn't have to work as hard, but it also makes it easier for your human brain to figure out what's going on and deal with trying to modify it or make it more useful for whatever it is you're trying to do. And you can continue to simplify and it will continue to reduce the number of nodes while trying to maintain the overall shape that you started with. You can see that this is not quite as jaggedy as my original drawing, but the overall shape is still there. Can be useful. So Arius, let's have a look at Arius. Let's make that smooth. Let's make that and that and that smooth as well. Grab the handles for that. So that's getting close. Go back to the fill and stroke menu. Pretty happy with that. And then we just want one more. And then for all those people who are screaming in pain at this one being a different color to the rest. There you go. Alright, so what I've done is recreate almost none of the dial itself, but I have now got a workable Columbus logo. So I'm going to leave it there, much to your disappointment, I'm sure. This has actually taken way longer to explain than I expected it to. It's been really interesting mental exercise, so hopefully this is useful. Hopefully it's got you on your way, and in the next part I'll show you how to recreate the actual dial scale here, and then some gotchas when it comes to fonts for numbers and station IDs, etc. Have a play with that. Inkscape is available from inkscape.org. Thanks for watching. Sorry we didn't achieve a whole lot in this video, but it's getting really long, and I want to keep these as short and sweet as possible without overloading you. So I recommend that you grab an image of a dial and then just have a crack at it. Pick a simpler one, because the more complex ones will probably break your brain to start with. I will have a look at some more complex ones a little bit further down and just show you some things that can make life a little bit easier, and we'll do that in a future video. But for now, hopefully that's been useful. Thanks for watching.